chances are that you're not washing your hands properly. Yet, washing your hands both regularly and thoroughly can prevent the spread of infectious diseases, especially now during the flu season. And because today is Global Hand Washing Day, I'm going to show you how to wash your hands properly, explain why it is so important, and at the end I'm also going to give you a bonus tip what you can do if you do not have access to soap and water. But first, let's go and wash our hands. The whole process of washing your hands with this technique takes around 20 to 30 seconds, which seems like quite a lot for just washing your hands, right? So why should you do this each and every time? Is hand washing really this important? The answer is of course yes, and here's why. Bacteria, viruses and fungi are everywhere, but not all of them are bad. In fact, most of them are not harmful for humans or are even beneficial for our health. However, there are a few that can cause disease, and some prominent examples of viruses that can cause disease are influenza virus, which causes the seasonal flu, or SARS-CoV-2, which we all know from the COVID-19 pandemic. And I will refer to these harmful viruses and bacteria as pathogens from now on. Now, pathogens are transmitted from one human to another through numerous different ways. But one common way is through the mucosal surfaces in your upper respiratory tract, which is a fancy word of they somehow get into your airways and then cause an infection. So how do these pathogens get there? One way is, of course, when you breathe them in. When these pathogens are, for example, in tiny little liquid droplets in the air that you then breathe in, and that's how they come in contact with your respiratory system. Another way is through contaminated hands that then touch your mouth, nose, eyes, etc. And this is why hand washing is so important. It can remove these pathogens from your hands and thus limits the spread of disease. And there are numerous studies which demonstrated just how effective hand washing is for limiting the spread of infectious diseases. However, I won't get into them in this video, but instead I want to exemplify the importance of hand washing by going back in time around 200 years. Picture this. Europe in the 1840s. All over Europe, many women are dying shortly after giving birth from what is known at the time as childbed fever. And one of these hospitals where this is occurring is the hospital in Vienna, Austria. Now, this hospital has two maternity wards. One is run by doctors and the other one is run by midwives. But contrary to what you're probably thinking now, the doctor's ward had a much higher mortality rate compared to the ward run by the midwives. And this didn't just intrigue me when I first heard it in my lectures, but it also intrigued Hungarian physician Ignaz Semmelweis. So much so that he looked into what caused this almost 3 times higher mortality rate in the doctor's ward. And he tested many different things. He looked into whether overcrowding or different climates in the maternity wards could cause this. He even tested if the position in which they gave birth somehow affected the occurrence of childbed fever. Eventually, he ruled out all of them. Until one day, after the death of one of his colleagues, he finally found the culprit. Now, Semmelweis realized that the doctors who worked in the maternity ward in the afternoon worked in the morgue in the mornings. They performed autopsies there, or they taught their students anatomy or how to do certain procedures. But that per se wasn't the issue, because Semmelweis also realized that the doctors didn't wash their hands or didn't do so properly before going from the morgue to the maternity ward. And as we know now today, what probably happened is that the doctors transmitted some pathogens from these dead bodies to the newborns and their mothers. Now the midwives, they didn't work in the morgue. They only worked in the maternity ward, which is why they didn't transfer any pathogens from the corpses to the new mothers. After he realized this, Semmelweis mandated a rigorous hand washing routine after working with the dead bodies before going to delivering babies. And this hand washing routine was so effective that the mortality rate dropped from 18% before to only about 2%. This is a 10x improvement. This is huge. And it goes to show just how important it was that the doctors washed their hands. Unfortunately, germ theory, so the theory that pathogens can cause disease, had not been established at the time, which also means that Semmelweis could not offer a theoretical explanation as to why hand washing was so effective at preventing childbed fever in new mothers. And that's sadly also why Semmelweis and his theory were mocked and ignored by most of his colleagues. So the hand washing went out of the window and mortality rates shooted up again. It took more than 20 more years until hand washing and scrubbing became a regular practice for doctors before tending to their patients. And as gross and disturbing as this story might sound, I think it's a very good example of just how important and how effective hand washing can be in preventing the spread of infectious diseases. Which brings me to the question, how? How does hand washing do this? After all, it's just water and soap. Well, soap, as boring as it might sound, actually has some pretty cool features. But to understand how soap works, we need to go a little bit into chemistry. Broadly speaking, we can divide substances into two different classes: water-soluble substances and water-insoluble substances, also called fat-soluble substances. And as the name suggests, water-soluble substances can be easily dissolved in water, and fat-soluble substances can be easily dissolved in oils, fats, and other non-polar solvents. However, it's very difficult to even impossible to dissolve fat-soluble substances in water or vice versa. And this, for example, is why water and oil normally don't mix. So this also means when you just rinse your hand with plain water, you will get rid of all of the water-soluble substances that are on your skin. But the fat-soluble substances, they will stay. And this is where soap comes in. Soap is a so-called amphiphile. Like amphibians can live both on land and in water, amphiphilic substances have both a water-soluble part and a fat-soluble part. This means that the soap molecules can arrange themselves in a way that the fat-soluble part faces the fat-soluble dirt on your skin, while the water-soluble part faces outwards into the water. And like that, the soap molecules can encapsulate this fat-soluble dirt or pathogens or whatever that are sitting on your skin and make them water-soluble, which means that the running water will just flush them away. But this is not the only way how soap works, because soap also has a second superpower. Because of its fat-soluble part, soap can also dissolve fats. Now, it is important to know that bacteria and certain viruses have a lipid membrane around them. You can imagine it like a shell around them made of fats. And now, because soap can dissolve fats, it can also dissolve this lipid membrane around bacteria or viruses, which basically destroys them and makes it impossible for them to infect you. Up until now, we know how to wash your hands properly, why it's so important to do it, and how soap works. But when should you actually do it? Broadly speaking, we can again divide the reasons for hand washing into two categories. The first one is after potential contact with pathogens, and the second one is before any activity that might bring these pathogens inside your body. So what are things that are potential contamination sources? You should wash your hands after sneezing or coughing, because these are two ways in which pathogens can spread from one person to another. You should also wash your hands when you come home or after using public transport. You should wash your hands after working in the lab or tending to patients, especially when you work with pathogens in the lab or your patients may have an infectious disease. After using the toilet, and if you're a parent, after changing the diapers of your kid, after handling trash, also after contact with animals. And yes, this includes your pets, because they might carry some bacteria or viruses that are not harmful to them but may cause disease in you. And last but not least, when your hands are visibly dirty. So the second category is about preventing the pathogens from getting inside your body. So you should wash your hands before bringing something to your mouth or touching your mouth. For example, before cooking, preparing food, or eating, but also before taking any medications. You should generally wash your hands before touching your face or your eyes in particular, and this includes putting in or removing contact lenses. You should wash your hands before and after visiting a sick person. Before, so you don't bring any pathogens to them, and after, so you don't take any pathogens with you as you leave. And lastly, before or after dressing wounds, because an open wound is the perfect entry point for many pathogens. These lists are obviously not exhaustive, and there are many occasions where hand washing might be recommended, but it should give you a rough idea of when you should wash your hands. In the beginning, I also promised you a bonus tip, which is what you can do if you do not have access to water and soap. And that's pretty simple. Use hand sanitizer instead. You just take enough of the hand sanitizer, put it in the palm of one of your hands, and then you do the exact same procedure as you would during regular hand washing. There are a few things that you need to consider when using hand sanitizer instead of water and soap. And the first is to make sure that your hand sanitizer contains at least 60% ethanol, which is the active ingredient in hand sanitizers. It's also important to notice some differences and some limitations of hand sanitizer. For example, water and soap will mechanically flush dirt and pathogens away and remove them from your skin. But hand sanitizer works by killing these pathogens. However, it's not effective against all pathogens. For example, bacterial spores are unaffected by hand sanitizer. Hand sanitizer will also not remove any obvious visible dirt from your hands, and it can also not remove certain chemicals from your hands. So for example, when you work in the garden and your hands are full of earth, hand sanitizer will not get rid of it. And likewise, when you spray some insecticides maybe on your plants and you have some on your hands, hand sanitizers will not get rid of them either. So in these cases, it's really advisable to wash your hands using water and soap. Nonetheless, hand sanitizer is a perfectly valid alternative to water and soap. If you don't have access to them, you can also use it in conjunction with regular hand washing. But if you have the choice, use water and soap. To sum up this probably lengthy video, washing your hands is not that difficult, and it only takes around 20 to 30 seconds if done correctly. And while this might seem like a lot of time for just hand washing, it's time well spent, because it can prevent the spread of infectious diseases to others and it keeps you healthy. So why don't you just give it a try? Because that was it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it and found it useful. And if you did, then please let me know by giving me a thumbs up. And to those who have been following me for quite a while now, you may have noticed that this is quite a different video from what I previously did. And that's because I have many different interests. And I don't want to limit myself to just one single topic on my YouTube channel. Don't worry, there will still be videos about fitness and exercising and weightlifting and nutrition, just not exclusively. I hope you like it, and as always, thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Bye!